The mountains never gave up their secrets easily. Luke Carter knew this better than most people. He had walked these woods for years, learning every sound they made and every moment of silence. Tonight felt wrong. The forest was too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Luke stood on his old wooden porch, looking out at the dark trees. His eyes were sharp from years of training as a soldier. The wooden boards under his boots felt cool and familiar. This place had given him more peace than any battlefield ever could. But tonight, that peace was broken. A horrible scream cut through the air. It was sharp and strange, nothing like any animal he knew. The sound made his skin crawl, and his heart pound like thunder in his chest. His head snapped up just in time to see something incredible. A bright streak of light blazed across the dark sky. This wasn't a shooting star. Luke had seen enough of those to know the difference. This light moved with purpose, like it was being controlled. It left a fiery trail behind it as it flew. His stomach twisted as he watched the light disappear behind the trees. The ground shook beneath his feet seconds later. Something heavy had crashed hard into the forest. Luke knew in his gut that whatever had fallen wasn't natural. It wasn't from this world. Luke didn't hesitate. Years of military training kicked in like muscle memory. His body moved on its own, grabbing his rifle and flashlight from inside the cabin. He walked down the porch steps, his boots making crunching sounds on the gravel path. Then he headed straight into the dark forest. The rifle felt heavy and familiar in his hands. It was a reminder of a life he had tried to leave behind. But here he was again, moving through thick bushes and trees like he was back on patrol in some dangerous place. The forest seemed to change as he walked deeper into it. The air grew thicker and harder to breathe. It smelled like smoke and metal, burning his nose with each breath. The trees around him bent and swayed like they were bowing to something powerful. Their branches shook even though there was no wind. The shadows seemed darker here, like they were alive and waiting for something to happen. Luke's flashlight cut a thin beam through the darkness, guiding him toward where the crash had happened. Every step took him further from safety, but he couldn't turn back now. Something inside him needed to know what had fallen from the sky. When he finally reached the clearing, Luke stopped moving. His breath caught in his throat. What he saw made no sense. The wreckage was spread out before him like the body of some giant dead animal. It was twisted and still smoking from the crash. This was definitely a ship, but unlike anything Luke had ever seen in his life. The surface shimmered in the moonlight, showing different colors that seemed to move and pulse like a heartbeat. The metal looked almost alive. Its smooth design was torn and broken, with bright blue cracks that glowed like lightning. Smoke rose, up in spirals, disappearing into the tree branches above. A low humming sound filled the air, vibrating through the ground and into Luke's bones. He stepped closer, raising his rifle. Every part of him was on high alert. He scanned the wreckage, looking for any signs of life or danger. His training told him to be careful, but his curiosity pushed him forward. Then he heard something that made him stop. A soft sound carried on the night breeze. It was a whimper, quiet and almost human. Luke turned his flashlight toward the sound, sweeping it over the broken ship until the light landed on something that made his heart skip at first. He wasn't sure what he was looking at. A woman lay slumped against the sharp remains of the ship. Her body was hurt and bleeding, but that wasn't what shocked him most. Her skin was a deep purple color that seemed to catch and reflect the moonlight like blood. A cut on her forehead, but this blood wasn't red. It glowed softly as it trickled down her face. Her hair was long and silvery purple, falling around her face like a waterfall. Even hurt and bleeding, she looked fierce and strong. In her arms, she held a child close to her chest. A little girl, who couldn't be older than 5 years old. The child had the same purple skin and glowing eyes that stared at Luke with a mix of fear and wonder. Her small hands clutched at her mother's torn clothes. Luke's breath caught in his throat. He had expected to find danger, maybe hostile creatures or advanced weapons. What he found instead was a mother using the last of her strength to protect her child. It was the most human thing he had ever seen, even though they clearly weren't human. The woman's eyes suddenly snapped open, locking onto his. They burned with defiance and strength, even though she was clearly in pain. Her body tensed despite her obvious injuries. She shifted slightly, moving to put herself between Luke and the child. "Hey," Luke said softly, lowering his rifle. His voice was calm and steady, the same tone he had used countless times to calm frightened people. "I'm not here to hurt you or your daughter." The woman's gaze flicked to his weapon, then back to his face. Her lips moved, forming words in a language that was completely alien to him. Yet somehow, it sounded beautiful, even in her desperation. The melody of her voice was unlike anything he had ever heard. She tried to push herself upright, but her body was too weak. She sagged back against the wreckage, breathing heavily. The child whimpered and clutched at her mother's clothing. Her wide eyes darted between Luke and the dark forest around them, as if expecting something dangerous to emerge from the shadows. Luke crouched down slowly, setting his rifle aside but keeping it within reach. "You're hurt," he said, his tone gentle. "Let me help you and your little girl." The woman's eyes narrowed with suspicion. She shook her head weakly, her grip tightening around the child. It wasn't just mistrust that Luke saw in her face. It was fear. He had seen that look before in refugees, in families caught in the crossfire of wars they didn't start. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for her child. Luke's chest tightened with emotion. He pulled off his jacket, holding it out as a gesture of peace. "It's cold out here," he said, his voice even softer now. "Take this for her. She's shivering." The woman hesitated for a long moment, studying his face. Finally, she nodded almost imperceptibly. Luke stepped closer carefully, draping the jacket over her shoulders. Up close, he could see just how badly she was hurt. Her breathing was shallow and labored. Her skin was pale beneath its purple color. She was running out of time. "We need to move," Luke said, glancing toward the dark forest. "This place isn't safe. I can hear things moving out there." The woman blinked at him, her gaze sharp despite her exhaustion. She spoke again, her voice low and urgent, but the words were lost on him. She gestured weakly toward the ship, then to the child. Luke frowned, trying to understand what she was trying to tell him. Was there something or someone else in the wreckage? A sound from the forest snapped his attention away. It was faint, almost too quiet to hear, but it was enough to set his nerves on edge. Something was coming through the trees. They were no longer alone. Luke turned back to the woman, urgency tightening his voice. "We have to go now. Whatever's out there, I don't think it's friendly." She seemed to understand the danger in his tone. With great effort, she shifted the child toward him. The little girl whimpered but didn't resist as Luke lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, her small body trembling against his chest. Her glowing eyes looked up at him with a mix of curiosity and fear. The woman tried to stand on her own, but her legs buckled under her weight. Luke caught her before she could hit the ground, supporting her with his free arm. The three of them moved together as one, Luke's steps quick but careful. He knew these woods well, but carrying two injured people made everything more dangerous. The forest seemed alive now, the shadows closing in around them as if drawn by the crash. The humming from the ship grew fainter with every step they took, but the sense of danger lingered. It gnawed at the edges of Luke's mind, like a hungry animal dot, as they broke through the tree line, and his cabin came into view. Luke's thoughts raced. Who were these people? What had brought them here from wherever they came from? And perhaps most pressing of all, what or who had caused their ship to fall from the sky? For now, those questions would have to wait. The only thing that mattered was survival. As Luke carried them into the safety of his cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had started tonight was far from over. Days later, the nights grew colder as time passed. The silence around Luke's cabin now felt heavy with unspoken tension. Luke Carter found himself struggling to adjust to sharing his solitary home with beings from another world. The forest beyond his walls seemed unnaturally still. Its usual nighttime symphony of owls and insects had been replaced by an uneasy quiet. The local animals had scattered, their instincts telling them that something unnatural had arrived. Inside the cabin, however, the once familiar space pulsed with new life. Life that Luke had neither expected nor fully understood how to handle. Kara sat by the crackling fire, her posture straight but tired. Her purple skin shimmered faintly in the dancing light of the flames. The intricate geometric patterns etched into her skin seemed to move and shift subtly, as if they responded to her emotions. She rarely spoke, but her silver eyes carried depths of expression that needed no words to understand. Her daughter Lara leaned into her mother's side, clutching a carved piece of wood that Luke had given her that morning. The child's luminous gaze moved about the cabin constantly, curious but cautious. She seemed to be waiting for the next unexpected twist in this strange new life. Luke stood by the small kitchen counter, scraping the last remnants of stew into a tin bowl. The rhythmic scrape of the spoon against the metal filled the quiet space. It was a mundane sound that anchored him amidst the surreal reality of his new companions. He glanced at them from the corner of his eye. The sight still felt jarring despite the days they had spent together. Their presence filled the room in a way silence never could. They had transformed his peaceful retreat into a reluctant sanctuary for the lost and wounded. Setting the bowl down, Luke turned toward Kara. His movements were measured and careful. He had learned quickly that sudden actions unsettled her. She had the bearing of someone who had lost too much. Her every gesture was tight with restrained vigilance, like a wild animal that had been cornered too many times. Luke crouched beside her, being careful not to intrude on her personal space. "Eat," he said gently, nudging the bowl toward her. Kara hesitated, her eyes flicking to his hand before settling on his face. There was mistrust there, but also gratitude. Slowly she took the bowl. Her long, slender fingers brushed the edge carefully. Her movements were deliberate, as if the act of accepting the offering was a clear message of tentative trust. Lara, however, wrinkled her small nose at the stew. Her tiny hands clutched her wooden toy tighter, as if it could protect her from the unfamiliar food. Luke chuckled softly, the sound unexpected even to himself. "Not a fan, huh?" he said, turning toward the child. "What do you eat then? What kind of food do you like?" Kara tilted her head, watching him carefully. She seemed to understand the question's intent, but struggled to find a way to respond. Instead, she gestured toward the symbols Luke had painted on wooden boards scattered around the cabin. Rising gracefully despite her injuries, she moved to one near the door and traced the sign for tree with her finger. She circled it, then tapped her lips. "Berries," Luke guessed. "Fruits?" Kara nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. Understanding passed between them like a small victory. Laura's small hand tugged at her mother's sleeve. Her large eyes were bright with anticipation, as if she understood they were about to go on an adventure. Luke grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. "All right then," he said with a smile. "Let's see what we can find out there." The forest was colder than it had been the night Kara's ship had fallen. The ground was covered with delicate frost patterns that crunched softly underfoot. Luke led the way, his flashlight casting long beams through the dark trees. Kara followed, closely behind, her steps almost silent despite her injuries. Lara trailed behind them, her fascination with every sound and shadow evident in her wide eyes. She darted toward a patch of moss, then froze, staring intently at a small bird perched on a low branch. The animal remarkably didn't flee. Instead, it cocked its head as if studying her in return. There was something magical about the moment, as if the forest itself was welcoming this strange new visitor. Luke paused, glancing back at the scene. "She's a curious one," he said softly. Kara's lips quirked into the faintest smile. It was an expression so fleeting it felt like a secret shared between them. She gestured for Lara to stay close, her hand brushing the child's head gently. The protective warmth in the gesture struck Luke in a way he hadn't expected. It reminded him of something long buried, a memory he couldn't quite grasp, but felt deeply in his chest. They found a patch of winter berries after a short trek through the woods. The red orbs glowed faintly in the dim moonlight, looking almost magical against the dark branches. Kara inspected them carefully, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she picked only the ripest ones. Her knowledge of which berries were safe was clearly born from experience. Lara mimicked her mother's actions, her small hands gathering a handful before presenting them proudly to Luke. He accepted the offering with exaggerated gratitude, drawing a giggle from the girl that echoed softly through the quiet woods. The sound was pure and innocent, reminding Luke of simpler times. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. The berries seemed to invigorate both mother and child. Their moods were lighter as they shared the meager bounty. Luke sat by the fire, whittling a new toy for Lara. He had grown fond of the quiet rhythm of carving. The scrape of the blade against wood had become a grounding ritual amidst all the chaos. Kara watched him closely, her gaze thoughtful and intense. Finally, she pointed to his knife, then mimicked the motion of carving with her hands. Luke raised an eyebrow, understanding her request. He handed the knife to her carefully, handle first. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, and he felt the surprising warmth of her alien skin. Blade to her cautiously, she tested its weight before beginning to work on a small piece of wood. Her movements were familiar, but fluid the shape. She carved, emerging slowly, but deliberately. When she finished, she handed it back to him. It was a bird. Its wings outstretched as if mid-flight, simple yet elegant, it captured the essence of the creature with remarkable clarity. Luke turned it over in his hands. "Impressive, you've got a knack for this, Carrara," tilted her head, clearly not understanding his words, but that pride in his tone seemed to reach her. She nodded a subtle acknowledgement that spoke more than words could. As the day stretched into weeks, a fragile rhythm emerged, circus strength returned, though she remained wary of the outside world. Lara, on the other hand, embraced the small wonders of the cabin, and forthwith growing enthusiasm, Luke found himself adapting their presence, shifting his solitary existence into something he hadn't realized he craved. But not all shifts were welcome. One Evaners, Luke sharpened his axe by the fire. Kara froze her gaze, snapped to the window, her markings flaring faintly as a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the room. Luke followed her line of sight, but saw only the darkened forest. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Carrara didn't respond, but rose swiftly, pulling Lara close. The child whimpered, clutching her mother's leg as the hymn grew louder, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Luke grabbed his rifle, his pulse quickening. The sound wasn't natural, it carried a mechanical undertone a deliberate purpose that set his instincts. A blaze moments later, a beam of light pierced the forest, sweeping across the trees with chilling precision. Luke cursed under his breath, extinguishing fire with a quick kick of his boot. He motioned for Kara and Lara to follow him into the smaller room at the back of the cabin. His makeshift storeroom turned sanctuary. Kara's breathing was shallower, silver eyes wide with fear. Lara clung to her tightly, her small body trembling. Luke crouched by the doorful at the ready, his senses sharpened. Whatever was out there, it wasn't friendly. The hum grew louder, the beam of light passing over the cabin's front door. Luke's grip on the rifle tightened, his mind racing through every possible outcome. He had thought the crash was the end of something, but it was beginning to look like it had been only the start. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced across the cabin's modest interior. The rhythmic sound of Kara's carving tools scraped against a piece of salvaged wood, steady and purposeful. Luke Carter watched her from his chair near the window, his fingers absently tapping against the rifle balanced across his lap. He told himself he was keeping watch, looking for signs of the armored intruder that had attacked them days ago. His attention often drifted inside toward the two beings who had turned his isolated refuge into something unrecallably alive. Kara sat at the table, her silver eyes focused on the intricate design she was etching into the wood. The soft glow of her violet skin seemed to absorb the fur light, her markings shifting faintly as if responding to her thoughts. The piece she was working on looked like a bird, its wings outstretched. That the design was distinctly alien, with angular curves and geometric accents that hinted at a culture far removed from Earth. At her feet, Lava hummed quietly, stacking wooden blocks into precarious towers. Her small hands moved with careful precision, a melodic hymn filling the cabin with an otherworldly comfort. The child's energy seemed boundless, and yet she was cautious, always casting quick glances toward her mother or Luke as if seeking reassurance. Luke found himself smiling faintly. Despite the heaviness in his chest, he shifted his weight, the chair groaning beneath him. The sound caught Kara's attention, and she glanced up, her expression softening. She said nothing, but the brief look of acknowledgement, a flicker of trust, was enough to stir something in Luke that he hadn't felt in years. "How's the project coming along?" he asked, his voice low but carrying across the quiet room. Kara tilted her head, considering his words, though they had been working to bridge their language barrier. Many of Luke's phrases still eluded her. Instead of answering, she held up the carving, her slender fingers turning it in the firelight. The bird's wings caught the glow, it shaped delicate yet purposeful. Luke nodded, impressed. "Not bad, you're getting better at that." Her lips curved faintly, a gesture so subtle it might have been missed, but Luke had learned to read her quiet expressions. She placed the carving on the table, then gestured toward the rifle across his lap. Her silver eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze questioning. "I keep it close," he said, tapping the barrel, just in case Kara didn't seem reassured. She rose, slowly, moving with the deliberate care of someone still recovering from injury, and approached the window. Her markings flared faint L as she peered into the forest, her posture tense. Luke followed her gaze, but saw only the familiar outline of trees swaying gently in the wind. "They won't come back tonight," Hesed, though his grip on the rifle tightened. "Not this soon." Kara didn't reply, but the tension in her frame remained. She had told him little about the armored figure that had attacked them, only that it was one of many a hunter sent to track her and Lavra. The details of why she was being pursued remained frustratingly unclear, though Luke suspected it was tied to the shimmering piece of alien tech she had hidden beneath the cabin floorboards. She hadn't explained its purpose, but the way she guarded it told him all he needed to know. It was dangerous, and it was important. Laura's tower toppled with a clatter, breaking the quiet. The child let out a soft gasp of surprise, her wide glowing eyes darting to her mother. Kara turned immediately, her stern gaze softening as she knelt to comfort her daughter. Laura reached for her mother's hand, her small fingers curling around Kara's slender ones. Luke watched the exchange, something tightening in his chest. She's tougher than she looks, he said, his voice soft. Kara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. She lifted Lara into her arms, cradling the child against her chest. Lara rested her head on her mother's shoulder, her hum returning quieter now, like a lullaby. Luke set the rifle aside and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. We need to talk about what happened, he said, his tone serious. Use that thing that came after you. It's not just going to disappear. We need a plan. Kara sat down across from him, holding Laura close. Her silver eyes met his, their depths unreadable. She gestured toward the trap she had helped him construct earlier that week. Then mimic the act of setting it. Traps won't stop them, Luke said, shaking his head. Not for long. That thing was armored. Fast, we need something stronger, a way to see them coming before they're on us. Kara's brow furrowed, her marking shifting subtly. Us considered his words. She tapped her fingers against the table, then motioned toward the hidden compartment beneath floorboards where the alien device lay. Luke stiffened. That thing. No way, he said firmly. You don't even know if it still works, and if it does, it might just bring more of them here. Kara's gaze hardened, and for a moment the tension in the room thickened. But then Lara stirred, her small hand reaching for the table. Kara's expression softened, and she nodded reluctantly, signaling her agreement to wait. Luke exhaled, relieved. We'll figure something out, he said. But for now we keep things quiet, low profile. The rest of the evening passed in strange silence. Kara returned to her carving, her movements slower, more deliberate. Laura fell asleep in her mother's arms, her small frame rising and falling with each breath. Luke sat by the fire, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer carrying it alone. Later that night, as the fire burned low, Luke stood on the porch, staring out into the darkness. The forest was silent, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The intruder's attack had been a warning, a reminder that their fragile peace was temporary. Behind him the cabin glowed faintly with the warmth of the fur light. Inside, Kara and Lara slept, their presence a quiet defiance against the dangers that lurked outside. Luke tightened his grip on the rifle, his jaw set. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain: he would fight to protect them. The force shivered under an eerie silence, its nocturnal symphony stifled by a presence that did not belong. Luke Carter stood at the cabin's threshold, scanning the shadows that pulled beneath the towering pines. The chill in the air pricked at his skin, but his focus remained unwavering. Something was wrong. The usual calls of owls and rustling of small animals had vanished, leaving a stillness oppressive. It felt alive behind him. The cabin was dim, its fire reduced to faint embers glowing in the hearth. Kara sat near the window, her sharp alien senses attuned to the shift in the air. Her translucent violet skin seemed to absorb the faint moonlight filtering through the cabin, her geometric markings glowing faintly as if reacting to her tension. She glanced at Luke, her eyes betraying a knowing dread. They found us, she whispered, though her words were spoken in her native tongue. Their meaning was clear. Luke nodded, tightening his grip on the rifle slung across his chest. Stay inside, he instructed, his voice firm and quiet. Don't come out unless I call for you. Carrera hesitated, her gaze lingering on him. Her reluctance was palpable, but relented, motioning for Lara to follow her to the corner of the cabin. The child, small and luminous as a star, clung to her mother's side, her wide eyes darting between Kara and Luke. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She understood the gravity of the moment too well. Luke stepped outside, the cold seeping into his skin as he surveyed the clearing. His boots crunched against the frost-laden earth, each step a deliberate sound in the otherwise still night. He crouched low, his rifle at the ready, scanning the tree line. His military instincts, had through years of combat, kicked in. Every sense sharpened. A faint hum broke the silence, mechanical vibration that sent a chill down his spine. He shifted his gaze toward the sound, and there between the trees a faint shimmer caught the moonlight. Cloaked figures moved with deadly precision, their forms briefly visible, as their stealth technology faltered under the forest's dense canopy inside the cabin. Kara worked swiftly, her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she assembled makeshift defenses from the salvage pieces of her crashed vessel. She twisted wires, fusing alien energy cores with Luke's simple tools. A fragmented plasma conduit became a trip mine, and an damaged energy cell was rigged into a rudimentary device. Every pulse of blue light emitted by her work felt like both a lifeline and a beacon. She glanced at Lavra, who watched her mother in silence. "Stay hidden," Kara said softly, brushing a hand over her daughter's head. Lavra nodded, clutching a small wooden animal Luke had carved for her, its presence of fragile comfort in the chaos. Kara stepped outside, carrying a sleek hybrid weapon forge from the remnants of her ship. The staff-like device hummed faintly, its edges glowing with contained energy. She moved to stand beside Luke, her presence quiet, but charged with determination. "They're here," Luke murmured, his eyes fixed on the shadows. Carrera nodded. She didn't need to see them to feel the hunter's presence. Air itself seemed to pulse with their malice. The first hunter revealed itself in a burst of motion. Its cloaking flickered, revealing an insectoid form clad in segmented armor that gleamed like oil under the moonlight. It moved within human speed, its multi-jointed limbs slicing through the air, but it miscalculated, stepping into one of Kara's traps. The energy mind detonated with a sharp crack, sending a surge of blue light coursing through its body. That creature screeched, its limbs convulsing as it collapsed to the ground. Luke didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, firing a precise shot that caught the second hunter in the shoulder. The alien staggered, its weapon arm sparking, but it recovered quickly, emitting a guttural growl before Luke could fire again. The third hunter charged, its blade like appendage cutting through the air. The impact knocked Luke to the ground, his rifle skidding out of reach. He rolled instinctively, avoiding the downward strike aimed at his chest. The hunter loomed over him, its eyes glowing with predatory intent, but before it could strike again, Kara intervened. Her staff hummed as she swung it with calculated precision, the energy-infused edge SLing into the hunter's armor. The creature reeled, and Kara pressed her advantage, her movements fluid and unrelenting. She danced around the hunter, her strikes deliberate, each own driving it further back. Luke scrambled to his feet, retrieving his knife from his belt. The second hunter, injured but not incapacitated, advanced on Kara, its disruptor weapon glowing with deadly intent. Luke lunged, plunging the blade into the exposed joint at its side. The hunter screeched, its weapon discharging harmlessly into the ground as it collapsed. A sharp, high-pitch sound cut through the air. A drone, small and fast, zipped out from the trees it locked onto. The faint energy signal emanating from lava inside the cabin. Kara's eyes widened in alarm, and she broke from the fight, racing toward the cabin. "Lava," she shouted, her voice raw with fear. Luke acted on instinct. He spun, unsling the rifle from his shoulder, and fired. The shot missed the drone's erratic movements, making it impossible to hit. He dropped the rifle and grabbed his knife, his arm snapping forward in a practiced motion. The blade spun through the air, striking the drone dead center. Sparks flew as it crashed into the clearing, its energy core sputtering out. Kara reached the cabin, throwing open the door to find Lavra unharmed but trembling. She pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "It's over or outside." Luke stood amidst the wreckage of the fight, his breath visible in the cold air. Two hunters lay dead, their forms still and lifeless. The third had retreated into the forest, its blood marking its escape. He glanced at Carrera as she stepped onto the porch, Laura clung to her side. Their eyes met, and for a moment the weight of the battle hung heavy between them. "This isn't over," Luke said, his voice grim. "They'll send more." Kara nodded, her expression resolute. "Them will be ready in that moment amidst the quiet of the forest, reclaiming its voice and unspoken. Bond solidified between them. They were no longer just survivors. They were a team, a family bound not by blood, but by the fierce determination to protect one. Against whatever came next, the cabin stood as a flickering beacon in the deep stillness of the forest. Its swirling light spilling through the cracks, and its wooden walls inside, the air was alive with the quiet rhythm. The crackle of the fire, the faint hum of alien technology Kara tinkered with, and the soft melodic humming of lava as she stacked wooden blocks in front of the hearth. These sounds blended into a harmony that filled the once silent space. Luke Carter had called his refuge. Luke leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Kara work at the small table. Her hands moved deftly, assembling a hybrid device from a combination of salvaged alien materials and human tools he had scavenged for her. Her violet skin shimmered in the warm light, the geometric patterns that etched her body glowing faintly, as if responding to her focus. Every so often she would tilt her head, her silvery eyes narrowing in concentration, and make an adjustment that resulted in a faint hum or spark of light. Luke crossed his arms, smirking faintly. So what is that, some kind of space blender? Kara lipped up, her lips curving into the faintest smile. A shield, small but strong. Her words vaulting carried pride. The melodic cadence of her voice softened the sharp edges of the alien accent. Luke raised an eyebrow, pushing off the counter to step closer. Shield. Huh. Planning for the next time those hunters come knocking? Carrera nodded, her expression serious. Always planning, never not ready. Her response struck Luke, reminding him how her life had been shaped by survival. I get it, he said quietly. You can't let your guard down even for a second. Kara paused, her gaze locking onto his. But here safer, she said, because of you. Luke's breath caught. He looked away, suddenly finding the floorboards interesting. It's not just me. You've done your part too. Kara tilted her head, her smile returning. She reached across the table and tapped the devastator. The word hung in the air, simple but profound. Luke nodded, a smile and spoken agreement passing between them. As the evening wore on, Luke found himself outside on the porch, the cool night air biting at his skin. He leaned against the railing, gazing up at the vast expanse of stars. The weight of the past few weeks sat heavy on his shoulders. Kay and Laura's arrival, the battles with the hunters, and the growing bond he couldn't ignore. He heard the creak of the cabin door and turned to see Kara stepping out. She held a mug in her hands, its steam curling into the cold air. Her violet skin glowed faintly under the moonlight, and her silver eyes seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Couldn't sleep, he asked, shifting to make room for her on the porch. Kara shook her head, stepping closer. She offered him the mug, and he accepted it without hesitation. The drink was warm and faintly sweet, a blend of human and alien ingredients she had concocted. He took a sip, savoring the unexpected taste. Good, he said, handing it back to her. Kara sat down beside him, her gaze lifting to the stars. For a moment they sat in silence, the only sound the faint rustling of the forest. Then she spoke. My people saw stars as guides, she said, her voice soft. They told us where to go, who we are. Luke glanced at her, intrigued. Like maps? Kara shook her head. More. They speak to us, tell stories, help us understand. Luke followed her gaze, trying to see the stars as she did. And what are they telling you now? Kara's markings flared briefly, her lips pressing into a thoughtful line. That I am not alone. Luke felt a strange tightness in his chest. You're not, he said after a long pause. Kara turned to him, her expression softening. You feel the same? Luke hesitated, the weight of her question settling heavily on him. But as he looked at her, at the strength and vulnerability etched into every line of her face, he knew the answer. Yeah, he said, I do. Her smile was small but radiant, a glimmer of flight in the quiet darkness. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of energy. Karan Luke worked side by side, repairing parts of the cabin and expanding their defenses. Their conversations, once stilted and cautious, grew more natural, filled with Shared jokes and small moments of understanding one afternoon as they worked to reinforce the garden fence. Kara asked a question that caught Luke off guard. Humans, how do they show love? Luke froze mid-swing, the hammer in his hand, hovering over her. Nail he turned to her, his expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. Why do you ask? Kara shrugged, her gaze fixed on the piece of wood she was holding. Your way's different. I want to understand. Luke set the hammer down, leaning against the fence. Well, it depends on the person, he said, choosing his words carefully. Some people are loud about it, big gestures, big words. Others not so much, they show it in quieter ways. Small things. Kara looked at him, her eyes searching his face. And you? Luke hesitated, the question hitting closer than he expected. I guess I'm more of a quiet kind of guy. Kara smiled faintly. I see. She didn't say more, but Luke couldn't shake the feeling that her question had been more than curiosity that evening. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Luke found himself sitting closer to Kara than usual. Lova was asleep, her small frame curled up under a blanket on the floor. The quiet was comforting, but Luke felt a need to fill it. Kara, he said, his voice low, can I ask you something? She looked up from the device she was working on, her expression open. Yes, do your people have something like marriage? A way of saying this person matters more than anyone else? Kara tilted her head, her markings glowing faintly. We bond deeply, it is. Not words, it is knowing. Luke nodded, his chest tightening. And how do you know? Kara smiled, a warmth in her gaze that made his pulse quicken. When you see them and you feel home. Luke swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to his hands. Home, he repeated softly. Kara reached out, her fingers brushing his. Yes, home. In that moment, Luke felt something shift. Thekabun wasn't just a place anymore. It was a feeling, a connection, and it was sitting right in front of him. As the fire burned low, Kara began to hum a melody, soft and haunting. Luke listened, its sound weaving through the air, like a thread connecting them. He didn't recognize the song, but it did matter. It was hers, and that made it enough. Teach me, he said suddenly. Kara blinked, surprised. Teach the song, he said, leaning closer. Teach me your song. Kara's smile grew, and she began to hum again, this time slower, her voice guiding him. Luke joined in hesitantly, his deep tones blending with her higher melodic notes. The harmony was imperfect, but it was there. As the song faded, Kara placed a hand over his. Together, she said. Luke nodded, his voice steady. Together for the first time in years, Luke Carter felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was living. And for the first time he knew he didn't have to do it alone. The air in the cabin hung heavy with anticipation, an unspoken tension settling over the small family. Kara stood by the window, her silver ice reflecting the early morning light, filtering through the trees. Her slender fingers hovered over the wristband she had salvaged from a wrecked vessel, its faint blue glow pulsing steadily. It had been weeks since the device had picked up the distress signal, a faint, desperate call from her people. Now the pulse was stronger, more insistent, like a heartbeat reaching across the stars behind her. Luke Carter leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. His rugged face was calm, but his furrowed brow betrayed his unease. It's getting closer, isn't it? He asked, breaking the silence. Carr nodded. Yes, they are not far, maybe 2 days. Lara sat on the floor, cradling the small wooden bird Luke had carved for her. The child's luminous eyes flicked between her mother and Luke, her expression solemn. She was too young to fully understand the gravity of the decision looming over them, but she felt it nonetheless. Carrera turned to Luke, her voice soft but steady. We must go. Luke's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He had known this moment was coming ever since Kaya first revealed the signal. It was the last tether to her world, a chance to reconnect with whatever remained of her people. But it also meant leaving behind the fragile sanctuary they had built together. You're sure it's safe? He asked, at his tone cautious. What if it's a trap? Kara hesitated, her markings dimming slightly as she considered his words. I do not know, she admitted, but I must find out. Luke nodded, his expression softening. Then we'll go all of us. Kara's eyes widened, slightly surprised. Flashing across her face, you would leave your home. Luke glanced around the cabin. That place that had been his refuge for so many years. The walls, once a shield against the world, now felt like a cage. Looked back at her. His voice resolute. This stopped being just my home a long time ago. The preparations began immediately. Kara worked tirelessly modifying the remaining alien technology to help them navigate the journey. She constructed a portable energy shield, a compact device designed to protect them from potential attacks. Luke gathered to supplies food, water, and the tools he had relied on for years in the wilderness. He moved with purpose, his military training guiding every decision. Lavra, sensing the gravity of the moment, helped in her own way. She organized their meager belongings into neat piles, her small hands working diligently. Luke smiled. Ash watched her, a pang of pride mixing with the ache of uncertainty. Good job, kid, he said, ruffling her hair. She beamed up at him, her innocent joy balm to his troubled thoughts as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest. The family gathered around the fire for one last night in the cabin. Kara hummed a soft melody, a song from her home world that resonated with an aching beauty. Laura leaned against her mother, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. Luke sat silently staring into the flames as the weight of their decision settled over him. "You're not scared?" he asked suddenly breaking the stillness. Kaya looked at him, her gaze steady. "I am afraid," she admitted, "but I am more afraid of doing nothing." Luke nodded, his respect for her growing with every word. "You're braver than me." Kara smiled faintly. "You are wrong." The journey began at dawn, the family stepping into the forest with a mix of determination and trepidation. Kara led the way, her wristband glowing faintly as it guided them toward the signal. Luke followed closely, his arm slung over his shoulder, and his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. Laura walked between them, clutching her carved bird tightly. The forest was alive with sound, but Luke noticed the subtle shifts, birds taking flight, animals darting away as they moved deeper into the wilderness. Hunters had taught him to notice such signs, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "We're not alone," he said quietly, his hand tightening on his weapon. Kara stopped, her markings flaring briefly as she scanned the area. "They are close," she said, her voice low. "But they do not know how." Luke frowned. "Let's keep it that way." As night fell, they set up camp in Asmal clearing, using Kara's energy shield to create a protective barrier. Laura fell asleep quickly, her small frame curled up against her mother. Luke sat at the edge of the camp, his rifle resting across his lap as he kept watch. Kara joined him, sitting close enough that their shoulders brushed. "You do not rest," she observed. "Can't," he replied, his voice quiet. "Not until I know you're safe." Kara placed a hand on his, her touch light. "Backgrounding, we are safe. Because of you." Luke looked at her, his heart tightening. "It's not just me," he said. "We are team." Kara smiled, her markings glowing softly together. The final leg of the journey brought them to a hidden valley, its lush greenery a stark contrast to the dense forest they had left behind. At its center stood a powering structure of alien origin, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. The signal pulls stronger now, a steady rhythm that resonated in the air. Kara approached cautiously, her breath hitching as the structure began to shift. Panels slid open, revealing an interior bathed in soft ethereal light. A figure emerged, humanoid but unmistakably alien, its form adorned with markings similar to Kara. The figure said, its voice layered in melodic. "You survived." Tears welled in Kara's eyes as she stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I did, and I brought family." The figure's gaze shifted to Luke and Lavra, a look of curiosity and understanding crossing its face. "Then you are welcome." Luke exhaled, tension in his body easing for the first time in days. He looked at Kara, a smile tugging at his lips. "Looks like Wemadik." Kara turned to him, her eyes shining. "Because we are strong." As they stepped into the light, Luke felt a strange sense of peace. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time he believed they had a future, one built on trust, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of a family forged in the stars.